Because Gary talked a lot about like obsession can be good and bad, right?
Correct, right? And like I feel like you are well researched. Ash gave me a heads up. She said, "Ali's so well researched," and like,
well, I like you want to know, and just so you get a sense of you too, you know. So that's why we said like I'm really relaxed because it is a chat, and as I say, I've heard bits and bobs come up in different podcasts. So you're impressive.
I appreciate that so much. Well, speaking of impressive, I have the wonderful Ali Langdon face to face with me here at Channel 9. I feel very fancy.
Fancy.
These suites are nice.
Have you seen the room? We're in a tiny little white box.
But the whole building itself is pretty special. Walking around, seeing the advertisements. I will say Sydney is always a maze. I found myself doing a few loops to find my way back into the car park, but we made it.
This is a particularly hard car park to find, and I knew immediately when I drove in right behind you that it was you in the car because you were driving so slow, and the rest of us tear down to B4 like it's a racing track. And I thought, I bet this is Bradley.
I was kind of hoping no one had seen my car because on the way up there were cobwebs hanging off the side mirror. I parked my car outside at home. We've got one space.
I've got cobwebs on mine as well.
Okay, I was just like, oh God, like it really isn't a good sign of taking care of your stuff. But I like Soph to park inside so she doesn't have to go out early in the morning.
That's gorgeous of you.
That's me pumping myself up on camera because we are recording. So good to be here. Thanks so much for doing this.
Absolute pleasure. I really like your podcasts. I like your style, and I've loved the guests that you've had on. Particularly last year. It was great. So thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I found out something about you just then. My original belief was that you grew up just a little bit outside of Port Macquarie in Wauchope, but you're actually from the Illawarra.
Yeah, originally. Yeah. So Doris Avenue, Woonona, and lived there until I was 7. And my dad always wanted a farm to grow up and have space. So we moved up to a farm in Wauchope around then, and so spent most of our childhood up there. But all our family's still in the Gong, and we see them a fair bit. It's a good spot. It's a good spot to grow up.
It's a great part of the world.
Yeah.
It's a great part. I actually spend a lot of time in Woonona. I was in Woonona this morning.
Really?
Yeah. So Soph and I live in the city in Wollongong, like just 2 minutes south of the city, and I find that the city, even now, is a little bit busy for me. I used to be like one of those just super extroverted, out-of-the-box cats who wanted to chat to everyone, bump into a million people in the morning. And speaking of country life, I feel like my partner has channeled a little bit of country energy into me, where I'm still very chatty and want to say hi to everyone, but I kind of feel like the pace of my mind wants to slow down a little bit at times.
You know what that means? You're just getting old like the rest of us.
Yeah, that's probably fair. That's probably fair.
You kind of reach a point where it is, the city's great for this, but just the peace and quiet and a slightly slower pace lifestyle. There's a lot to like about that.
There is a lot to like. And even for me, just like that 15-minute trip north to Woonona, like anywhere between Woonona and Stanwell, which is quite a vast area, like it's probably 30 minutes worth of driving. But it just offers that, especially during the week. Like Monday to Friday when people aren't down from Sydney on the beaches, it's so calm in the morning. Like I don't see anyone.
And how do you feel about Sydney-siders coming down and stealing your beaches on the weekend?
Look, they're open to all right because we do the same. We come up here and enjoy
honest.
the city.
Yeah, there's a little bit of you that doesn't like it.
There's a little bit of me that doesn't like it when I can't find a park.
Yep.
You know, it's like, but it's for me, like that's such a beautiful part of the world. Like I particularly, for as long as I can remember, my favourite place in the world has been Ostermere.
Right.
It's just something about it, like right on the foothills of the mountain, right on the sand. Like it's just, I just feel calm there, and I feel like I can very much vouch for a life in Ostermere, except we need to find the deposit for a $3 million house because it's expensive now.
That's just a small, teeny-weeny little problem, isn't it?
It's just a little obstacle.
Yeah.
But
whereas I remember back when, when I was growing up and back then that Ostermere was cheap. Yeah, and you look at all those places now and just go, why didn't we?
If we'd only known.
If only we'd known, we'd be millionaires.
It's so funny to me though. So you moved from the Gong and you moved up to Wauchope. I feel like in Warhope there wouldn't have been, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there wouldn't have been too many signs of people who were doing similar to what you do now. Like your inspiration would have come from watching programs, if the inspiration was even there to begin with. Like you seem highly ambitious to me, and I love that about you. I love that if you track your career, you've gone from field reporter, to the Today Show, a current affair. Like you're at the top of reporting and journalism in Australia, and you do an amazing bloody job of it. Like where is that ambition born?
Look, I don't know, and look, definitely ambitious, and always have been, and it's sort of funny then what's behind it and what drives it. Like there is definitely that sense that that it can all be taken away tomorrow. But going through school, I've got an English teacher in Year 8, Mr. Roberts, who's still alive, and he remembers me saying in Year 8 that all I wanted to be was a journalist. I used to love writing, and I wrote this poem one day and took it in to show him, and he really liked it, and he got it included in, like, it got published in a book about, I think it was like something about the area, and anyway, it was about living in Warhope, this poem, and living in the bush, and so he just sort of, it was that first sort of sign that you can do something and it can kind of go somewhere. And I've just always loved English and writing, so it's been one of those funny things, and I talk to my siblings about it all the time because neither of them had any idea, and I'm the middle child, but I'm like, we've never known what we really wanted to do, and you were just this annoying kid who just from 12 always knew this is what I wanted to do and never deviated from it. So in some ways it kind of makes it easier. And then I was lucky that, in going to university, Charles Sturt in Bathurst back then was the best journalism course you could get into. So it wasn't a big transition going from a small country town. I mean, I thought Bathurst was big because, we didn't have traffic lights, still don't have traffic lights in Warhope. To like Bathurst was like, it's 5 sets of traffic lights in town, but it was just a really big country town. So a really kind of easy transition from a small town to sort of where, we sort of eventually end up. But I think a lot of it too just comes down to, well, I'd say luck. Some of it's luck, but also just hard work. So I would, in every uni break, I would just volunteer and do an internship at one of the television stations, or like whether it was local, NBN up near home, and would just always, every holidays when, between working restaurant jobs, because I put myself through uni, and then trying to do that. And so my first job, which was actually Nightline, which was the late news here at Channel 9, it wasn't that I had any special skill. I was just in the building at the time, and they needed a producer, and I sort of feel like it was almost like, well, she's kind of always sitting there, or, just you may as well do it because you're here and it's easy. So, I sort of feel like that was my start. It wasn't that, there was any thought that I had anything special or could write or do anything, but there you go. No one's going to interrupt our room now.
We're on. Is that what you identify as the luck?
Yeah, right place, right time. Yeah. And there's definitely more. A lot of that, what was behind that was the couple of years of just coming in and
for sure
being here and doing whatever and sort of saying yes to anything. But that then paying off.
Well, I think I've always believed, because I believe in luck, and a lot of the luck that I believe in is because I was afforded some of it early in my life. But I do believe that to continue to receive luck, like, you have to couple that with hard work and persistence. I don't think you continue to get lucky.
No, you can have lucky breaks in it. And I think, my whole thing is just if I just work harder than everyone else, then you'll get there. And I don't think I wasn't a naturally talented journalist. At university I had mates who were much better than, like, sounded better as a broadcaster. My voice was a bit light. And I remember one of my early bosses telling me I needed to drink a lot more whiskey and smoke cigarettes. Thankfully, I didn't take that advice. Or maybe the whiskey, a bit of whiskey, but not the cigarettes. But just sort of just stuck with it and probably took the long road with it. So, you know, a lot of mates who sort of made it quicker, but the fact that I'm sort of, I'm 44 doing a current affair now. I did 60 Minutes for 10 years, but sticking with that for 10 years and the skill set that, that I took from that was, you learn a lot. And so spending time in each job that I did, I found really helpful. So I sort of feel like it's been a real slow burn kind of getting to this place, but I've never felt like I wasn't moving or wasn't moving forward. Like I was still learning stuff. And, I think the day that you reckon you've nailed your job and know how to do it is the day you should quit, because you can always be better. All of us can. It doesn't matter what we do. So, it's important to look back at, interviews you do, or, you probably do it with podcasts, and when you listen back and then you go, okay, what could I have done this or this? And, like you constantly doing that so that for nothing else, you don't get bored.
I love that. You raised something before which I was super keen to talk about, the reporter's voice.
Oh, yeah.
You touched on the whiskey and the cigars thing, and I don't know if you know Jack Archdale, more well known as Jarchi.
Yeah.
So Jarchi has one of those whiskey and cigar voices, and he admits to having a few shots of whiskey and a few cigars in his day, but he has one of those deep, raspy voices. When we recorded the podcast, I was like, I could almost not put your name on this,
and people
just let you speak,
exactly.
And people will know who it is.
Yeah.
But the reporter's voice is something I've always been confused as to whether it's a show voice or whether it's your actual voice. But I feel like it's your actual voice. You've got a great voice.
Well, I think you eventually reach that point where you just speak normally as
kind of like Austin Butler.
Yeah.
That Elvis voice, right?
Exactly. But in the early days, sure, it's like, you come in and you're in your early 20s and you walk into a place like Nine, and there are your Yanas, your Tracys, your Liz Hayes, your Tara Browns, and you look at what they do and it's like, oh, I've got to be grown up like them, and you do. It took years to kind of just relax, because as soon as you're also trying to do a voice, you get uptight. So everything then goes up as well, and it just doesn't work. I listened to some of my early 60 stories, and there's some of the best beautiful, like, picture yarns, or like, with bears or in a volcano or with great white sharks, and they're cool, but then I can't stand listening to my voice because I feel like I'm still playing grown-ups.
Yeah, okay. So you almost mature into the voice.
And you just become comfortable in your own skin. And I talk to a lot of the younger guys with their scripts and things, and it's like, the language that they use. It's like, mate, you're not going to use that language if you're sitting opposite your friends at the pub telling them what you just did today. So the way you sit there and tell your mates at the pub is how you put it in a script and how you deliver it as well. So you're not trying to sound like someone else. And people can tell you that a million times. It just eventually one day it finally clicks, or you're kind of comfortable enough to go, just be you.
When do you think it clicked for you?
During my years at 60, and probably not till I sort of felt I had a hang of what the job was and how to do it, where I then just felt comfortable that, no, actually I do deserve to be here. And there was a bit at the start, because I was only 30 when I started 60 Minutes, which was young, and I'm walking in and all those names again that that I talked about before, not even just the reporters, all the producers who were, in some ways, in my mind, even more famous than the journos, because they'd been there for a long time and were, brilliant. And so it's like, I remember the first time there's a wonderful, wonderful human, Howard Saker, and he's the most lovely man and so good, beautiful writer, of just being utterly terrified. First time going out and working with him, it's thinking he's going to think I'm an idiot. He's going to think, like I'm not smart enough, I'm not, this, or I'm not blah, blah, blah. And man, that's when your voice goes up because, you're thinking about all the wrong things and, you just got to get, like you get out of your own head and sometimes just you need to remind yourself, this is not about me,
Sure.
And I think sometimes we get so caught up in our own performance and it's because we want to do a good job. So it makes sense why, but as soon as you just remember, this is about whoever I'm sitting opposite and telling their story and as soon as you're out of your own head and you're not thinking about your own performance, you're thinking about the person opposite you. And that's one of the things, working at the Today Show with the producers when they'd write scripts and questions, it's like, I don't care what your question is, but what do you want the answer to be? So, you might write, okay, that you probably think that's a clever question, and it is. Where do they go with the answer? And if they don't go anywhere, then it's not a good question. So sometimes, your best questions are really, really simple ones. But, it's every time I ask a question, it's about what do I want to get out of this? Which sounds straightforward, right? But weirdly, as journos, we sometimes try to get a bit too clever and, it becomes, again, about us as opposed to who you're interviewing.
It's a bit of a trap, isn't it? And I picked this up in myself maybe early parts of last year where there was this, I don't know if you'd maybe even call it this sense of desperation where I was so keen to make this my career and to establish myself in the podcast space and be great at it and be recognised as great at it, that every time I sat down for an interview, there was almost this headspace of, this has to change my life.
Yeah. So you're thinking about you.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then so you sometimes talk about yourself too often.
Yeah.
Which had become such a pet peeve when I listened back in the edit. Why are you telling that same story? Or why are you repeating that? And it's different when a guest asks something that's relevant to the conversation you're having. But just too many times I was trying to impress potentially who would listen because of them. I was like, this is so not why I do it. And so
it all makes sense to me, what you're saying.
You have to release yourself from that. It's almost like these shackles of you feel like you're in it and it's always got to be profound. It's sometimes, like you said, the best stuff is simply a conversation, an interview where the guest gets to shine. And that's the purpose of the platform.
I almost think that the best recipe to get it right is you do all your research, and I'm detail. I do all of that. But when you get to the actual moment, don't try. Don't try, because as soon as you start trying, just relax and don't try. Which because then that's natural. If you've got it all there, I don't mean don't try the whole way through. Don't come in not having a bloody clue what you're going to talk about. But if you've done all that prep and research, then it's just relax, don't think about it, don't try. And that's your best content, I find.
Yeah, because I feel like you're actually in it. You're sitting there, you're listening. And I find that because I've tried a few different approaches, and which I'm sure you have over the course of your career too. And there were times where I'd sit down and I'd have a bit of an agenda for how I wanted the conversation to run. Yeah. And I'd go, okay, well, I'm super researched here today and I'm going to ask this, and this. And it just felt so clunky and unnatural and almost like I wasn't there. Literally, I could have recorded my questions on a bloody script and put it through AI and let it roll. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, know what I want to know about the guest. And then when I step in and I'm present and I'm curious, that's when I do my best work. Yeah. And so I agree with you so much. And that's such a fun place to interview from, where you get to fully enjoy the moment of being in it.
I always find the best interviews are one where I've prepped and I might sort of have an idea of where an interview is going to go. And I get to the end, it's I haven't asked a single thing I thought I was going to ask. That's when I know you've got a good story, because it just... You're listening and you're going where they go. and so that they're talking about something they're interested in, and you're going to get great content.
It's so interesting to me, right? So if you talk about the arc of your career, and like particularly I think I remember the first time that I ever seen your face and heard your voice on telly would have been 60 Minutes, like many years ago. And then obviously the Today Show and ACA is like those three places where I've seen you prominently doing your work. And they're all kind of different in their own rights. And so it begs the question of, there's a reason behind every one of them, but what are the things you've enjoyed about each of those experiences? And then what's been the reason to change?
So I remember when I got 60 Minutes, and I was being interviewed about it, and someone said, so you're 60, like what next? And I just remember thinking, what do you mean? Like, this is the only job I've ever wanted in my life. I don't know anything else I want to do beyond that. And which is why I was on the show for 10 years. And then Today's Show came about. I'd also had kids, and so it was getting pretty tricky. I had my first son, and when I was about 7 years into the show, so he would come with me on the road, and we made that work. It was stressful, but it was fine. It was fun, and it was great, and I have this great ability to just forget all the bad things and just remember good. And so I forget about him overseas and sleeping all day and being awake all night and having all that kind of stuff. But it just sort of naturally morphed then that, speaking to bosses here, that it wasn't, I'd sort of reached that point where I wasn't enjoying it as much, because I was taking my little girl Scout, who was, baby who I was feeding, on the road, but I'd leave Mackie, my 2-year-old, at home. And he was in that, it was like I couldn't go to the bathroom or go to work for the day or leave his sight, because sometimes I'd leave and I'd take his little sister and I might be gone for a week or 2 weeks, or I might just be gone for an hour, but obviously it doesn't have the ability to understand that. So it just sort of reached this point of like, I hate leaving him. And I've been 10 years on the show, and the Today Show stuff, I was doing weekends originally, and then it just sort of all kind of naturally happened at sort of the perfect time. The only one I'd say wasn't probably perfect timing was A Current Affair. I probably would have liked 2 more years on the Today Show. Just that we'd built a really solid team, loved the guys, and just sort of really felt like last year was going to be our year, and we'd sort of overcome some hurdles and this clear run. But then when you're asked to do A Current Affair, it's, as I say, I would have love it, wanted it, but just like, I remember saying to Tracy, it's like, do you reckon maybe like just 2 more years, Trace? Like, I don't know, like, just 2 more years. She's going, I'm done, Ali. No, I'm done. I've had it. And I think, feeling guilty about leaving the team in the morning too. We'd built this really solid team, and all really close, genuinely close outside of work. And thankfully, to this day, I still am with them. But, didn't want to sort of let them down. But at the end of the day, and Karl was great with this too, it's like, the hours are different, and this you can do for a lot longer. So in my mind, like 2 years down the track, but he just said to me, okay, so how do you then feel if you don't say yes now, in 2 years when you really want it and that's when you're ready for it, but someone's might be in that chair for 10, 15 years and that opportunity's missed. So the timing wasn't perfect, but it was the perfect job. And it's and what I've loved probably most about it, I almost feel like I'm combining what I did at Today's Show with 60 Minutes. I'm out on the road shooting lots of stories, which I love, and I did miss a bit when I was doing the Today Show. But you still got, the live element where you're in studio, and it's not quite 4 hours every morning, and but there's also not a 3 a.m. alarm clock. And I just love the show. So I feel like everything is kind of, the timing has been right or close to being right for each of them. And now that I'm in ACA, it's like I can't imagine doing anything else now. This is perfect.
I love to hear that. And, we spoke about being well-researched before. I feel like I'm researched on you because of your super producer, Ash. She gave me...
She taking all the credit.
No, to be honest, she told me, don't tell Ali I've told you all this.
Oh.
Because she's like, I want you to feel super researched. But I'd feel like a phony if I made out that I knew this just from research. So I've got to give her a credit where it's due.
That's fair. She's very good, by the way.
She's super dialed in. Her work ethic's insane. The time that she texts me back from like messages I've sent is just wild. So she's always on the clock. But she told me that the original host of A Current Affair is actually your father-in-law, Mike Willisey Sr.
Yeah.
Isn't that a funny little thing?
I know. It was and actually I had my daughter Scout in the office on Friday actually. It was just a babysitting drama, so she came in with me, and I've got this lovely video on my phone of her sitting on my lap saying, "Hello, I'm Scout Heather Willisey, welcome to A Current Affair." And then I found an old clip of my husband's father, so Mike Willisey, say, "Hello, I'm Mike Willisey and welcome to A Current Affair," kind of thing. And just to have, because obviously I didn't take the Willisey name, but just to have it was just really, really special having her in the chair and just hearing someone say that Willisey name again, sitting in the ACCA office.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it was really nice.
So what do you love about A Current Affair? Because I would say that from my outsider's perspective, the difference between today's show is it's sort of shorter, sharper moments where you're kind of, I guess you're the conductor of the orchestra in a way. Like you have your moments obviously on air, but you're always moving things to and fro, different segments, bringing different people in. Current Affair, you're creating the story. You're there, you're interviewing. It's a deep emotional dive into a subject, a topic, a person. Is there something about that you love in particular?
Yeah, I do. And I've got this beautiful story that I've just filmed with a 101-year-old lady.
Wow.
They're all, and she wrote love letters to her beau for 5 years during the war. Some of it, he was prisoner of war, World War II. And they're all being transcribed because he brought back all his copies.
Wow.
And so he passed away 10 years ago, but she's 101. She's got all the marbles and she's just this delightful woman. I sat down with her last week and she's donating all of their love letters to the War Memorial. And
how cool is that?
And they're just so lovely to read. And it's like, my dearest Dot, because that's what he used to call her. And so I love that story. And what I love about ACCA is we can kind of do anything. And, like tonight our lead story is a dodgy tradie who's we've helped get him locked up, and now he's actually going to jail, which is good. We do all that, but we do heartfelt. We can kind of, the show can be sort of anything, but we also get results for people. People where something's happened and the bank's not treating them well, and there's a real power in calling and going, "Hi, it's A Current Affair." And just how often we get results. It was last night, there was one that had an issue with their bank, and we called and you've got to give credit to them when they do step up and do the right thing and help them out. But we might be getting involved when they're 18 months into a fight. But that's the power of the brand too, that,
for sure.
We stand up for people. And not everyone can afford, when there's an issue, to bring in lawyers or will even know how to take on their bank or the language that they should use. So, we always get, it's fantastic how we get results. Or one of my favourite stories has been with Nicky Tadros, who's the little boy who was injured in the Seaward helicopter crash. He lost his beautiful mum, but him and his dad Simon, they've gone through such a tough time that we organised. We just sort of put the call out, and then next thing you know, we've got free medication for however long, you know, free groceries, people offering to come around and clean their house. It just, you know, all those things to help them out and get them through this really, really tough time. There's this wonderful audience and sort of viewers that we have that that will step up, and often, you know, sometimes we'll get really big, like, hey, look, I just want to help them and pay for all of that. But often it's you know, it might be grandma going, look, I've only got this, but I'd love to send in $20 to help with this and that, and people giving what they do. Or, you know, with Nikki Tadros, we had school kids wanting to give all their pocket money. And for me, like, that's what makes the show worthwhile. It's a great reminder that there are far more good people out there than there are bad. And sometimes, and probably a lot of it comes back to the industry I work in and what we cover, we always hear the bad news. And sometimes it's nice just to celebrate good people doing good things. And we often do that on the show.
Yeah, I love that. There's such a purpose behind it, right? And I feel like any time you can connect a greater purpose of helping people to the work that you do, it feels special.
Yeah.
Like in those stories, like when you actually get the depth of a story, it really has the power to do that.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the things I'm so blessed to do this show, because the people you connect with and some of the messages, as I'm sure like you just touched on, you receive, you just think, far out, like this is more than a show to some people.
Well, most of our story ideas come from people emailing in. You know, a lot of the stuff, I mean, you know, the best journos who go and they find a lot of stuff, but also we receive so many emails about so many different things. And I think it's because the show's real. And, you know, the show can sort of be anything we want it to be. But you talk to any of the journos and who work for this show, like everyone cares. Everyone gets fired up, and, you know, we get mad about stuff and you know, and fight for people. And you often see, I mean, I've done this for years, and most of the journos do as well. You keep in touch with, I mean, not everyone, obviously, you can't, but there are a lot of, you know, really special cases and stories that you do where you stay in touch with people for years and years and years.
You know, it's interesting. I watched this morning your story with Professor Scollier?
Yeah, Richard Scollier.
Yeah.
Isn't he an extraordinary human?
Just an incredible story. And I'd heard his story. I'd actually seen stuff pop up on social media from you guys a while back when that was recorded. And like just watching that story, and I could see how much it affected you. Like I could see, you know, your eyes starting to get a little bit teary, and like I can imagine for you to be able to sit in that seat and hear those stories, it's very reaffirming of some of the things that are really important in life.
Yeah.
Like what are some of the stories that for you, when you step away and like you take the mic off and you go home and you settle in for the night, that have had an impression on the way that you live your life, and maybe even change the way that you approach life?
I mean, I even just look at this year, and we're not far into sort of filming this year, and down in country Victoria, filming with Dr. Ash Gordon's family, and he's the 33-year-old doctor. There was a home invasion, an alleged home invasion, and he jumped in his car and he ended up being stabbed multiple times, once in the heart, and died on the street,
young man, wasn't
100 metres from me. A doctor, a man who, you know, he's dedicated his life to saving others. And I remember walking in to meet his family, all in the backyard. So his 4 siblings and their partners and his parents. And I think there was also something too about his parents. It just kind of resonated, having grown up where I did, and my folks, that just, I walked around the corner and you're meant to be professional. I just saw his mum and burst into tears and gave her a big hug. Because, you know, and then you film with them, and then you leave, and there's also this sense of guilt. And, you know, I've found it before when you do things like bushfires and floods, when you go in and people have lost everything, and you know, these really deep connections that you kind of almost create over something that's so tragic, and then you get in your car and we drive home, and then there's that guilt of like, well, my house is still standing, my family's safe, my family's well, and you know what you're leaving, and that process that family or that community still has to go through. But I also think feeling like that and it makes you better at the job. Like I cry, like I cry too much sometimes. But you know, you're sitting so opposite somebody who's going through something that you can barely imagine. You just feel for them, you know, and yeah, you cry along with them. Sometimes Ash, my producers the stories, will often watch them and just go, Ash, Hayley, I can't hear their answer. I can hear as you go and sobbing, like, you know, and you got to be careful of that, because you just, you know, sometimes if you cry too much, then all of a sudden you're a real distraction to it. So you've got to try and control it that way. But I don't have an issue these days in showing that emotion. I just think it's real and shows that you care and that, you know, you have a heart.
Yeah, I love that. I think, you know, it's funny that I'm an emotional cat. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm primed for a bit of emotion. And I love what you said about it shows that you care, because there was this great scene. I've spoken about it. I think I spoke about it on one of the podcasts I've done in Melbourne last week. Yeah. I don't know if you watched Boy Swallows Universe.
Yes. Yeah.
That scene where the little kid who's incredible.
Amazing.
What a talent.
I know.
What a talent. He's going to be a superstar. He already is.
Yeah. Where did he come from? Like,
yeah.
And how do you just have that ability to... And I thought that was also a great adaptation of the book.
I haven't read the book.
Oh, what do you mean? You've always got to read the book before you watch that.
I will say, and maybe this is a bit of a limiting belief, I'm a bloody hopeless reader because I get so distracted.
Okay.
But I love to listen. So I often listen to books. But I feel like I should start reading because it will get me off my phone more.
Yes.
And I've actually kind of half written a book. So
hang on. Back this up a bit. Whoa.
Correct.
So don't read books because you get too distracted and you can't stick with it. However, you have written half a book. So explain that to me.
I love writing. So this is so weird. I love writing, but I often struggle to sit and read. Mm-hmm. And it's something about, for me, I think the greatest books I've read, I've enjoyed more in audio form because of the emotion that you can put into spoken word. Yeah. So like I loved Matthew McConaughey's book because just hearing a bit of like,
that voice, right?
You're just like, something about that's special. Yeah. Will Smith's book was the same, where it was almost this performance. Like it was great. Like there was times where he'd break in a rap, he'd sing the Fresh Prince song. There was production and beats and like there's something special about hearing the author's voice. Yep. And even if you get an amazing narrator, I always preferred even a roughly spoken, sometimes stuttering, sometimes bumpy author who spoke emotion into their own words. There's something powerful about that.
Than having someone brought in, not
so
connected.
I love that. I love hearing a story from that person's perspective.
Okay.
But I have read my fair share of books. But I must read Boy Swallows Universe because I'd love to interview Trent Dalton. I think he'd be an incredible storyteller.
And a brilliant journalist.
Yes.
Trent.
So I heard him on Gary Jubilan's show.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, and really loved it. Found him quite funny. And I found him to be one of those characters that I get on with where he's not trying to be cool. He's like kind of like a little bit awestruck that he's in the room with this person. And I'm like, I like that. He's real. He's honest.
Yeah. And his books, I mean, Boy Swallows Universe was the first one I've read. I think it's all My Shimmering Skies. Anyway, it's about, it's set in Darwin, a little girl who's like the daughter of a grave digger. And it's pretty, it's beautiful. It's you know, but as his books are, like and then his last one is Lola in the Mirror.
Which I've been seeing public, like sort of promoted everywhere.
So I read it over Christmas break and I just like, but would cry and sob to the point where my nose gets entirely blocked. And my husband's just like, why are you persisting with this book? Like, it's like, I don't understand. It's like, and then I literally go to bed and I have to sit up straight because I can't breathe through my nose and go to sleep. My eyes are red and they're still gritty in the morning. It's like, what on earth? I'm going, I know what he's like, and I know it's going to have this amazing ending. But it was pretty dark and very Trent, but and then I finish it and I give it to a mate going, you must read this. It's amazing. My husband's like, it looked like torture reading that, but he's got a beautiful way with words.
He does.
I love that he's Australian.
Oh, I love that so much. And I just love that scene of the show where the little boy breaks down in tears and Lyle, his stepdad, just says, you cry because you care. And I love that. And so I had a moment on Friday. I'd been in Melbourne all week and I was tired, so maybe that had something to do with it. But I spoke at Keimer High School with one of my best mates, Brett, who's an incredible speaker too. And we spoke to this group of Year 11 students. There's about 130 of them. And we shared like a joint keynote where we both shared parts of our story. And it's particularly centered around resilience, this idea of understanding the power of purpose, embracing and harnessing that in your life, and then setting some goals that are aligned with that. Yeah. And then how like coping strategies and support systems can really help you along the way as you face those bits of adversity. And it's interesting because school students are always hard to gauge, right? Like at that age in particular, they were 16 or 17, these kids, there's 130 of them. And so as you look out into the room, you see 130 students and you almost see them as a group. Yep. And we spoke for 45 minutes. They went to a 40-minute lunch break. They come back and we done like a live Q&A for half an hour. And then we done like a bit of a whiteboard presentation around purpose, goal setting. Were you peppered with questions in that half hour? It's always funny. You get a few, but you get the very broad questions. So my mate Brett was attacked by a bull shark. You always get, how big was the shark? What type of shark was it? You get those questions for me like, how does it feel to run a marathon with bleeding lungs? Like you get the very surface level fun questions, which we love to answer. But then at the end, we stayed around for probably an hour and we had probably 40 students come up to ask private questions. They're the good questions, right? The really deep ones. And you can almost get the sense of they approach you and they're kind of looking around to see who's around them. And when they get their moment with you, they're so honest and vulnerable. Yeah. And like I had these three beautiful kids, like break down in tears and just ask me the most gut-wrenching questions and share like real hardships from their life. And we spent probably an hour chatting to a bunch of these kids and Brett was sort of over there, I was over here. So we had really like private moments with them. And I left and I called Soph and I was just like, I couldn't help but cry on the way home because I was like, I genuinely think we saved a life today. And like, it was so raw and so emotional. And I was like, we can never take for granted how lucky we are to do that. And I just see so much of that in your role as well, like how intimately you can connect with someone and not even the person that you're doing the story on, but someone in the audience who can see themselves in the person who's been represented in that story. And like, I think that is the most special thing about storytelling, interviewing, is it can actually change people's lives. Where that goes. I mean, you imagine you standing in front of that room and yes, there's 130 sets of eyes looking at you. And then someone at the end comes up and shares something so deeply personal and as you say, potentially saved a life that day. Who else in that room knew that person was going through something? Yeah, perhaps nobody. Perhaps no one. And applying what you're saying there to what I do. When I started at a current affair, my boss Fiona said, what topics, what's important to you? I do a lot of stuff with Are You OK Day, which I've done from the day of its inception, but also domestic violence. DV is a big one. So we basically our whole first show was domestic violence, which was, brave. And then we're going, gosh, are we being silly here? Like, we're sort of, not that a current affair doesn't touch that stuff, but we're making a really big statement with it. And for me, it was, when I started as a journo, I remember one story where I was sent out from the newsroom. It's like, oh, there's been a murder, head out and, I'm on my way driving there with the camera crew.
I'd get the phone call. No, come back to the office. Don't worry. It's just DV. We never used to report domestic violence, and it was that idea, well, it happens behind closed doors, and it was very similar with suicide. We didn't touch suicide. But the guidelines were around that were also that, you know, that you don't touch it. And then it just reached a point where we're sort of going, well, hang on, okay, we're not talking about it, but it's not getting any better. And I think the issue with suicide was always that, well, if you talk about it, it encourages it. I mean, the guidelines around how we do it are obviously very, very strict. If you don't talk about it, you don't fix it. And it's that same thing with domestic violence. It happens behind closed doors. And just in that first story we did, the emails that came and the number of people who, I was doing a story, I was filming with the police in southwest Sydney, and it was around domestic violence stuff. Just people we met who could recount that first story. And I think because it got headlines because it was our first show and we'd gone so hard on domestic violence, it was that, okay, this is important, we're going to really focus on it. We've done a whole bunch of stuff throughout the year. That stuff, when it sort of sticks in people's minds like that, and then you hear these stories of it just made me realise, I'm in a domestic violence situation. I didn't even realise, you know, like often people can see it with someone else, but they can't see exactly the same scenario that's when it's happening to them. But this particular story, a couple of people reach out and going, that's me, you know, and then do something in trying to help themselves to get out of it or to ask for help. And you know, that stuff's pretty important in the job we do. And I also think it's a responsibility we have.
100%. I had this conversation with, it'll be in kind of like part 2 of a podcast that comes out a bit later in the year with Keisha Pettit. She's a wonderful podcast producer from Sydney. And we spoke in 2 parts about her story, and then we spoke about domestic violence, which just kind of got brought up as a topic off the back of some discussion.
Did you chat to her last year?
I spoke to her. I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago.
A couple of weeks ago.
It was last year. We sat down to record, but we released it 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Incredible human being. Incredible human. And we kind of just got onto the topic of domestic violence off something that was brought up in the pod. It became relevant. And I said to Keish, I said, as a man, it strikes me that not enough men are calling out the shit behaviour they see in their mates. Like, that has to be a responsibility of any good bloke. Like, if you see something, you have to be courageous enough to pull your mate's head in.
Absolutely.
And say, mate, that's not right. Like, don't speak to someone like that. Don't treat someone like that. Because otherwise it's enabled. Like, if you let something fly in front of you, you've enabled it. And not everyone's in a position where they're confident enough to call something out. Yeah. And I'm not suggesting that people put themselves in danger if they're not capable. But I often think, like, how do you watch someone speak to someone like that? I wouldn't let someone speak to anyone like that in public, let alone to their partner. Like, it's just, and I think that's why those stories are so important. And it is, I'd say, arguably one of the most taboo topics in media because it's rarely brought up. And so Ash actually told me.
Well, it's also so broad. Like, it's also, correct. Like, I think there was something like in New South Wales alone last year, 47,000 AVOs were granted in relation to domestic violence. 27,000 of those orders were breached. Yeah. And
that's the hard thing. So I actually bumped into a friend of mine from Wollongong. Her name's Stacey, and she started an incredible organisation called Escabags. And Escabags is essentially these escape bags that are stocked at different retailers, pubs, places all around Australia where if you're a woman with or without children and you need to flee the home, you can go to one of these places and grab a bag that'll give you the necessities to get through the next couple of days. And she's a survivor of domestic violence, not that any situation is worse than the other, but a very, very violent case of DV over in the UK, and just has this incredible story about how she's found a way to Australia and all that she's overcome. But I remember doing a charity auction at an event in Wollongong for Esker Bags. And I remember just standing in the crowd and just hearing a story and just thinking, as a bloke who like loves his partner, loves his sister, loves his mum, like loves all the women in his life, to think that anyone could treat a woman like that, or anyone would treat anyone that they respect or love in their life like that. It's just like, it's so sad.
But and look, and that's, I'm in a similar situation to you, where I'm surrounded by brilliant men who love their families, who would never raise, their voices, let alone a fist. But then you look at a lot of the issues you then see with domestic violence. Drugs are often involved. Often too, it's generational. It's you grow up in a household and it impacts little boys and little girls. Little boys, because typically, not always, but typically, it's the men who are violent and the women who are the victims. These little boys grow up and they go, well, that's how you treat women. And these little girls grow up going, oh, that's how I will be treated or deserve to be treated. I did a story for 60 Minutes and obviously a few years ago, and it was a woman who'd been brave enough to leave a violent situation with the kids, and then her son in his teenage years became the abuser. So because he'd spent all these years just seeing, oh, that's how what dad did. So he was really, really violent. So she was trying to get help for him too, because she had two little kids who were terrified of him. He'd hide from him when he'd come home, and he was a teenage boy, and I think just dealing with, and look, he's in a really good space now, which is great. But for her, it's like, I've escaped this, but I can't escape it. Now my son is the one abusing me. And it was really powerful that they agreed to tell their story, and you almost had to like recondition this guy, because it's all he's ever known. How you show love, how you express anger.
That's such a challenging position too, because I often find the hard thing with this topic is I used to be very much of the mindset, if I ever seen that behaviour, that person would be cut out of my life. And then I remember hearing a conversation, I can't exactly remember where I heard it, but I heard this gent saying a few things that I thought were really valid. He said, men who express violence like that often do it because they don't know how to articulate how they feel. So firstly, we need to encourage and teach men how to communicate, which typically speaking, men aren't great at communicating their feelings, right? And so that's something we need to be better at, especially with young men, from an early age. The other thing is, he said, isolating an offender only pushes them further down that path. Yeah. And so how do we express that it's completely wrong, but try to change that behaviour so they don't continue to reoffend? And I thought that was such an interesting conversation of I'm so blessed that I'm surrounded by bloody unbelievable mates, had an incredible father, incredible men in my life who stand for all the right things. But I thought if I ever come across a character like that, it'd be a really hard line to walk between, of course, first calling it out, but secondly, how do you try to steer them in the right direction? Yeah.
And I think that's one of the problems that we look at when dealing with DV. It's that, okay, we're focused on victims, which we should be. We need to have, if someone's brave enough to get up and get out of a violent situation, they must be somewhere they can go. 100%. Always. And we don't have that. We just don't have that safe place for them for enough, victims to go to. I should call them survivors more than victims. But then also, what are we doing to and it's less palatable to people, I think. It's like, no, we help the women and all, but well, they're shit guys, they're this, just lock them up and do. we need programs for exactly that point, that maybe they've never grown up having any idea how to express whatever it is they're feeling. And this isn't making excuses for any of that behaviour, but it's like, if we're not also trying to fix this, then you kind of got to do both at the same time.
Well, I often think, so I had a stat pop up last year that made this, and this is, I think, where I got to this point in conversation with Keisha, is a stat off the back of, I can't remember, and I feel terrible that I can't remember the name of this lady, but who was unfortunately murdered by her, I think, a boyfriend she'd just been seeing. She was a young teacher from Sydney, or a young childcare worker from Sydney. Was it Lily someone?
Yeah, it was Lily James, who was a young teacher at St Andrews College in Sydney, and who'd broken up with a boy.
Yeah, and murdered. And it's just such a sad story. I think she was, in her early 20s. And it was Soph, my partner, who shared with me some of the stats that come out on the news after that 1 in 3 women report that they'd either been physically, verbally or emotionally abused by their partner. And I remember just being in utter disbelief. Surely that's wrong. And Soph was like, I'm telling you, that's right. And I went and had a conversation with a couple of my mates about it after. And one of my mates was like, you think about all the cases that aren't reported and how bad this probably is, likely is. And I remember sitting and thinking, so if it's 1 in 3 women, does that mean 1 in 3 men? I thought, no, it's not 1 in 3 men are a part of the problem, but it's the few that are, who continue to reoffend. Yeah. Because it's not stopped. The cycle isn't broken. They're broken men who continue to try and break other people in the process of going through their own insecurity, challenges, whatever it is that's happening in their own life. And I just think we have to do such a better job. And obviously it's not a simple solution. There's no simple solutions to these very complex problems. But surely we can take steps in the right direction. And that's why I think, part of what I can do is have conversations as a bloke on podcasts about the behaviour that should be called out.
The New South Wales Assistant Police Commissioner, Stuart Smith, who I filmed with during a domestic violence story the other week, he said, look, DV is probably as old as Adam and Eve. And while people have relationships, while there are human relationships, there will be domestic violence. But, there needs to be a heck of a lot less. There are ways we can do a lot more, and we need to be smarter in how we pick who are the, who we target and how we approach the problem. But that just goes to the size of the problem you're dealing with. When you're talking about human relationships, it's never straightforward.
No.
Should never be violent, for sure. But it's just one of those ones where you go, do you ever stamp it out? I'm not sure you can, but it doesn't mean you throw your hands up and say, we should be doing a lot more.
Let's talk about something a little bit more positive before we get to the end of this. we went down the rabbit hole of sad stories, but important to talk about nonetheless. One of the things that I think is the most amazing characteristic trait in you is you've been able to do what you've done professionally at the highest level, whilst also being a mum, a wife, and doing what looks to be a really good job of life. Just on the full. And one of the things that Ash said to me in the lead up to this was she spoke about your personality and how fun you are and how much you love to have a joke and how you are genuinely a human, which we often forget, right? We often see, for majority of Australia before today, because I know that you haven't been on a lot of podcasts, so a lot of people will see you in your professional field, on the front chair at a current affair, out in the field reporting stories, and that's you on game day. Yeah. But you as a human, what does the balance of a life look like outside of work?
I reckon I'm pretty good at balance, and I've reached that point having spent years of being terrible at it. We're trying to do everything, and I guess now because I work nights and the kids are asleep by the time I get home, I found balance. Like, I don't, if you want to know what's a great restaurant to go out to in Sydney, don't ask me, because I don't go out and don't like to. The weekends, I'm happy to do stuff if we're with the kids. I just like hanging with them. They're fun kids. I mean, they're pains in the ass at times, of course, as they all are. But, there's nothing more that I love than just being at home with my husband and the kids, and, and having people around to our house and all those kind of things. So I think just, we've just found that balance of kind of always you're putting them first. And life outside of work is pretty simple. Try not to overfill the week. One of my favourite moments of the week is, early in the morning, the kids come running in and my poor husband goes now, like, they never even say hi to him or go to his side of the bed. They're straight around to me, because obviously they haven't seen me the night before, and jump in. And that time in the morning where you've got them, where they're cuddling up, I make the most of that, because I know they're going to reach a point where there's nothing worse than jumping into bed and giving your mum a cuddle. Yeah. So I hold on to all that stuff at the moment. But life is pretty good. I mean, there are definitely times when it kind of, work gets too busy and there's stuff going on with where it gets too much. But husband and I are pretty good at then just sort of stripping that back in those times and talking about that stuff and, simplifying. So I'm really good at saying no to stuff.
That's a hard skill to acquire.
It's like I was on holidays in December. Now, December, as you know, is the most crazy month, and everyone tries to get in catch-ups before Christmas, and, it's typically lots of eating and drinking. I just said no to absolutely everything in December. Just like, no, I'm available in Feb. Let's catch up in Feb. I just cleared all of that. And that is something that's taken me, I think, 40 years to work out. But I finally got it right this Christmas breaks, and just saying no to stuff.
So you're, without saying where you live, of course, you're eastern suburbs based.
Yeah.
Does that mean, are you an honorary Chook supporter these days, or is that
No, you can't change. No, because you can't change footy teams. So, like, I'm Manly. I support Manly.
Wow.
Growing up, yeah.
Are we in Manly territory right now? We would be, right? North Sydney?
Yeah. I mean, since they got rid of the Bears, which is going back a while, they're thinking about bringing the Bears back.
They talk about that for years, don't they?
So Manly is my team. And, look, my husband goes for Roosters. And my son goes for Panthers. That's because all kids do, because they're the team that's won for the last few years. And it's like going like, mate, you're better to go. So anyway, I think he's sort of shifted now. He's like half Panthers, half Rabbitohs. So,
God, that's
and I like the Rabbitohs. I do like the Rabbitohs.
God, that's the dark side. You can't say that in your household.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's just fun. So my husband's like AFL family. So there's sort of Swannies. And I remember when I didn't really follow AFL. I think just country New South Wales was always rugby league. And I said to my husband, I better choose a team. And I was with the Today Show then, and we're going around Australia. And I was filling in for Georgie Gardner, so it was years ago. And I rang him going, I think I'm going to go for West Coast, because they, Swannies. And, my husband was dead serious. Absolutely not. I don't think we were married then, but it was just there was no negotiation. There was nothing funny about me even suggesting that maybe West Coast was going to be my team. So, anyway, Swannies and Manly Sea Eagles. Who do you go for?
I'm a Chooks man.
Hang on, you can't. You're gone.
Okay, so there's a good reason. So when I was born, my old man was a Steelers supporter originally. Yep. But when I was born, Brad Fittler was at the Chooks, and he used to, every point he scored, he'd donate money back to, it was either Sydney Children's Hospital or cystic fibrosis. Oh, okay. And I was a CF patient at Sydney Children's, so it was a great reason to barrack for the Chooks.
Absolutely. You know what? I'll allow that.
Yeah, thank you. And
and Freddie's a good fellow.
I would love to sit down with Freddie. For me, Brad Fittler was probably the first thing I wanted to be in the world, either him or Batman. is who I thought I'd end up becoming. I'm neither, but I'm very happy with my life now.
I think you got a little bit of both in you.
Yeah, a little bit of both. And it's funny because two of my best mates now play for the Dragons.
Right.
And so I'm often torn. Like I went to watch the Anzac Day clash and was sitting with some of my mates, Zach Lomax and Blake Laurie, both proud Dragons men and have been Dragons men for their whole career. I was sitting with Zach's friends and family in the stand and with my partner Soph, who they both grew up in Temora together. And I could not help but feel like this is the first time I think I've ever really sat on the fence watching a Chooks game.
Wow.
And so it's
so
weird.
you weren't wearing Chooks jersey?
I wasn't game. I wasn't game.
Soft.
I know,
on.
seriously.
I mean, you got to own it and cop the abuse that comes with it.
I know. Well, they played later on in the year and Zach kicked the goal to win the game. And I will say it got me out of my chair. I was pretty excited for him. Yeah. So I toe the line as a friend and a loyal Chooks supporter, which these days is kind of cloudy on both. So
I reckon you can blow the line there.
Yeah, you can a
That's
little
allowed.
bit.
That's
you're allowed
allowed.
to tiptoe on it. So how long do you think, like in a perfect world, how long do you sit as the host of a current affair?
I think why I still love it, why I still can't wait to, get up and actually go to work, and I legitimately mean that, while I still feel like I can add something to it, and I think, look, hopefully that's, who knows, maybe it's 10 years. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the audience will tell me, maybe in 2 years I'm booted and
I doubt that.
and we're done. It's hard to say. What I feel very privileged is that every job I've done, I've loved. I've never not wanted to go to work. There have been some mornings where the alarm goes off at 3 a.m. where you just go, what the...
Maybe
but
Carl
as soon as you're up,
yeah,
mainly because I know I'm going to have to sit next to bloody Carl for nearly 4 hours. And, there's... Yeah, I feel so lucky that I genuinely do a job that I love. And my husband talks about it a bit, like he surfs a lot and has all these hobbies, and I don't have a lot of hobbies. And he goes, well, you've always 60 was that, you're off and you're swimming with leopard seals and diving into the water in Antarctica, and all your adventure has come from your job over the years. Which makes you go, it's a pretty special job that's taken me all over the world, that you get invited into people's lounge rooms. They trust you to share their story, and often we get a great outcome from them. I can't see myself ever getting sick of that, but when I reach that point where I feel like if I lose that hunger for it, or I don't feel that, if I feel someone else can contribute more, then maybe it's like, okay.
Is there a dream beyond it, or is it just after this, sail off into the sunset?
I think sail off into the sunset. Do something entirely different, I reckon. I reckon finish this. And as I say, I'm hoping to stick with it for a while. But, go back to uni. Start something entirely different, entirely new.
I'd always consider a co-host.
Okay. You might get a call sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Pretty incredible life, Ali Langdon.
Thank
pretty
you.
special. Should
So's
be very
yours.
proud.
And you should be too.
I appreciate that.
I look forward to this next chapter in your life too, you and Soph.
Very exciting. Hopefully a couple of kiddies.
Yep.
Ostomy.
Love it.
And maybe I'll take up surfing again.
You should.
How good. Hey, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for making the time.
No worries. Thank you.
Cheers.